Hello, hi. I think we're live now, and welcome to this REF 2029 Town Hall. We're here to talk about the Contribution to Knowledge and Understanding guidance module that was published, I think it was last month, although I think I've lost track of time a little bit. And I'm Jonathan Petrosky, and I'm the head of REF Policy. And Rebecca, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Hi, I'm Rebecca Emmett. I'm a Senior Policy Engagement Advisor in the REF Policy team.
Fab. We're going to run for about an hour. Rebecca and I are going to run through in some detail in the actual policy and try and give some context and talk around that a little bit. Then we'll be collecting questions and answers throughout the session. So please use the Q&A function, and we'll spend as much time as we can getting stuck into those questions and answering them as far as we can. And the intention is that, if we can't answer everything, we'll definitely be thinking about the questions that are submitted, and they'll go on to inform our FAQs that will be published in relation to this module in the future. This guidance module, I think, sits alongside the codes of practice guidance, and we recently did a town hall about that. I think it was last week, and so I'd recommend that both of these resources are kind of looked at together as the complementary. Come next slide, please. Fab. I won't labour too long on this slide, but it is compulsory in all of our public engagements, and it sets the frame for REF. And it's important to say the REF is owned and led by the 4 UK higher education funding bodies. Informs the allocation of around £2 billion of block grant funding each year, and provides important accountability for that public investment. The REF continually evolves, and it has been historically alongside our research base. And given the connection to funds, it inevitably drives behaviour and is an important policy instrument across the UK. Next slide, please. And again, I'm not going to labour on this too much. You can find this information in the initial decisions, REF initial decisions that was published in June 2023. I am going to focus on the third of those 3 boxes, which highlight 3 priorities that were developed through consultation with the sector and that we really use to drive decision making and policy development. And in my mind, they form a triangle of factors which often need to be weighed and balanced against each other. And those factors are the robustness of assessment outcomes, the impact of the system on research culture, and ensuring that the bureaucratic burden of the system is proportionate. Next slide, please. I think it's over to you.
Cheers. So the Contribution to Knowledge and Understanding guidance, or CKU guidance, replaces the outputs module or outputs element of REF 2021, and the change in name also reflects the expanded scope of this element. The guidance module includes the rules pertaining to the eligibility and selection of outputs, and we'll go into that in a little bit more depth over the next hour. And there will be additional guidance published in the future around the detail on the disciplinary level evidence statements. So just to note that that is not expanded upon within this guidance module. And just to kind of frame that very quickly, so as outlined in the initial decisions, the disciplinary level evidence statement is planned to be a single statement with multiple sections, which will contribute to each of the 3 quality sub-profiles within the REF. It's intended to be a structured questionnaire using quantitative and qualitative evidence, and there will be word limits to the elements included, and it's not anticipated to have long narrative components. But as I say, full details and full guidance will follow in the future. So when we're talking about the CKU guidance, as you'll see, if you've looked at the guidance online, there's a summary of all the key changes between the CKU module and previous outputs guidance. I'm not going to go into it in full depth, but just to give you an overview, the first major change is decoupling. So this is building on the partial decoupling from REF 2021. The changes for REF 2029 move further towards assessing the performance of disciplinary areas within HEIs rather than individual researchers. So there are 2 significant changes associated with that. Firstly, the outputs do not need to be authored by someone on a volume contributing And secondly, that outputs don't need to be submitted to the same UOA as a one contributing contract where one exists. And we'll talk about that in a bit more depth later on in this presentation. So the important thing about this is it allows a wider range of excellent research to be submitted to REF, creating greater flexibility and more inclusive and equitable approach to capturing the diverse range of research and research communities across the UK. So secondly, for REF 2029, there will be no collection of staff details. So the volume measure will be calculated from the HESA staff record, and outputs will be eligible on the basis of the substantive link between the HEI and the research, which we'll talk about in a few minutes in more depth. But broadly, the substantive link policy fundamentally describes the relationship between an HEI and in research which is submitted in the form of an output. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. So other key changes are the removal of the minimum and maximum output requirements, and instead institutions will be required to demonstrate the representativeness of their output submissions. There will be no individual staff details and circumstances collected, and alongside this, there will be a new process for unit reduction requests. And as I mentioned previously, part of the CKU quality profile will be made up from the disciplinary level evidence statement, with additional guidance to follow after the conclusion of the PCE pilot. Over to you.
Super, thank you. So, we talked about this is concerning submission of outputs, its guidance, and thinking about it in the most simplest terms, I think HEIs must decide which outputs they're going to select for submission, and then do that in line with the CKU guidance and with its REF 2029 Code of Practice. And as per REF 2021, the number of outputs required in the submission is determined by multiplying the volume measure by 2.5 at a UOA level. And we've also retained the same rounding convention. And the full detail of that is in the volume measure guidance. And while we haven't published a full policy around joint and multiple submissions, we can say they will continue to be supported in this exercise, and we will publish that in due course. And we thought it's important to set that point out. There have been questions about that we've been receiving. And there will be an opportunity in the discipline level statement for institutions to contextualise the distribution of outputs and drawing on the processes that they've described in the codes of practice. And next slide, please. So, looking at the core requirements of eligible outputs, as per REF 2021, each submitted output must be the product of research, and again, similar to the last exercise, briefly defined as a process of investigation leading to new insights effectively shared. They need to have been brought into the public domain during the publication period, the 1st of Jan 2021, picking up from the end of the last exercise, to the 31st of December 2028. Or if it is a confidential report, they need to have been lodged with the body to whom it is confidential during this same period. I think one of the key changes in this iteration of the REF is the establishment of a substantive link. And in this exercise, the submitting HEI needs to demonstrate that link to the submitted output. And for outputs within scope of the open access policy, they need to meet the requirements of that policy. And next slide, please. Thank you. So substantive link, as I said, this is probably one of the key elements of this policy, and it's to do with the relationship between the submitting HEI and the research submitted in the form of an output. And in the last exercise, it's slightly different in that a list of people were submitted and the outputs were connected to those people. In this exercise, it's about the link between the HEI and the output. The HEI must have enabled the research leading to an output that is first made publicly available during the output eligibility period. And a substantive link has to be evidenced through an eligible employment relationship with an author or equivalent, because we know that that's different in different disciplinary areas, who's made a significant research contribution to the output. So the substantive link describes the relationship between an HEI and the research, and that link must be evidenced through an eligible employment relationship. Okay, over to you. Was it still me? Oh, it's still me, sorry. Okay, so I think we've had a couple of questions about the info on this slide, so I'll go through it and then talk about it a bit more. So the eligible employment relationship is defined as a minimum of 0.2 FTE for at least 12 months of continuous employment by the HEI making the submission. Continuous employment may be demonstrated by a sequence of consecutive contracts, so it needn't be one single 12-month contract. It could be 2 6-month contracts, for example. And the role descriptor includes an explicit expectation of research activity within the role. So I think firstly, to confirm that it is FTE and not con FTE, which I guess is a slightly different to the volume measure. And we've reached this decision by consultation with the initial decisions, who majority of people said that actually a longer duration beyond the 6 months originally proposed in the initial decisions was more appropriate. So we've followed that guidance and consultation with the sector. And through engagements, it was thought that the duration of the contract is important. So rather than looking at con FTE, which would be slightly different, it is important that it is 12 months of continuous employment. And looking at the second clause, I think there's been some misinterpretations or perhaps a lack of clarity from us around the intent. And really the policy intent in REF 2029 is to recognise the contributions of everyone who enables research and to kind of extend the boundaries of authorship in the previous exercises. So the term research activity intends to encompass the wide range of research enabling professions that contribute to UK research. So that's including but not limited to technicians and research managers and impact professionals and all the other people who do contribute to the to research. And I think overall that the balance that the policy tries to strike is to support submission of outputs produced by all staff, so long as research appears in the job description in some form. And institutions can submit research where it's been enabled, but not put pressure on individuals to research in their own time outside of the role, which is a protection that is kind of in previous exercises as well, and something that we wanted to extend to all the different professions who contribute to research. I think it is handing over to you this time.
Thank you. So just building on from that eligible employment relationship definition that Jonathan has gone through, we also have to look at that there are 2 different points when an eligible employment relationship may occur in relation to the publication of an output that's going to be submitted by an HEI. So the first instance is the point at which the submitted output was first made publicly available. So this is an eligible employment relationship that is happening at the time that the output is published. So we've had a number of queries already about whether a proportion of the contracts needs to have elapsed before the output becomes eligible for submission. And so I'd like to just emphasise now that the outputs published at any point during an eligible employment relationship are eligible, and that's stated in the policy at 6.4.2. And we've also had a number of queries about contracts that start in the last 12 months of the REF period, and whether they can be eligible employment relationships. Yes, because the output becomes eligible as soon as that 12-month contract commences. The output published on day 1 or day 2 of an eligible employment contract that starts in June 2028 would be eligible for submission. We've also had a number of questions regarding preprints as opposed to final formats of outputs, and I just wanted to flag that there was specifically a question around preprints that have appeared before 2021, so before submission of the previous REF. Just to confirm that if an output is published in an early online or a preprint before 2021 but was not submitted to REF 2021 and then has subsequently appeared in the final form during the REF 2029 publication period, that output would be eligible for submission, as long as the substantive link can be established and the eligible employment relationship underpinning it exists, etc. So We are conscious that additional guidance on this would be useful, so we'll reflect on that and ensure that clarity is available and readily available, either through the FAQs or another format, alongside the guidance. So that's the kind of the ongoing, the eligible employment relationship that occurs at the point at which an output is published. The other point that an eligible employment relationship may have occurred is a pre-publication substantive link. So this is where the eligible employment relationship occurred before the output has first been made publicly available, but when the research resulting in that output was carried out. So refer to that as a pre-publication substantive link. So for most outputs, this will be referring to the time period of January 2021 up to December 2028. But this period may be extended prior to January 2021 for long form or long process outputs, but that will be finalised by the panels during the criteria setting phase, and we'll update it on the policy document as when it is confirmed. We are anticipating that the pre-publication substantive link period will be 2 years for the majority of outputs and up to 5 years for long form and long process outputs, and will also need to be evidenced through a limited set of indicators, which again are going to be confirmed and finalised by panels during the criteria setting. But if you have a look on the policy online, you'll see that there are a number of likely indicators that are suggested, including evidence of internal research support, evidence of work in progress, or evidence of external grants, for example. But these aren't exhaustive and they will be finalised by panels. And then the final point around the timing of an eligible employment relationship is that an eligible employment relationship occurs after the point at which an output is first made publicly available cannot constitute a substantive link. However, we are actively working to explore an exception to this in relation to long form and or long process outputs. And this exception will allow the submission of these outputs in REF 2029 where an eligible employment relationship occurred after the point that the output was first made publicly available for a time-limited period. And this will be worked on by panels, and additional guidance will be published as part of the panel criteria and working methods in the coming months. So moving on then to exclusions, exceptions and exceptional circumstances. There are a number of employment relationships that are explicitly excluded from the definition of substantive link. So outputs where the sole connection to the HEI is via an author from one of these groups would not be eligible for submission. And this group includes PGRs, visiting or honorary staff, teaching only staff, and individuals employed on contracts with no explicit expectation of research. Now, in exceptional circumstances where the HEI has provided allocated time or funding to support research activity of someone on one of these excluded contracts, an HEI might seek clearance from the REF director to submit an output. And the process for doing that is outlined in the policy. The HEI is also required to outline a transparent and consistent approach to applying for that exemption in their code of practice if they want to make use of that process. Additionally to that, there is a further exception for the exclusion of outputs produced on an excluded contract where the author has subsequently been appointed to a role at the same institution that constitutes an eligible employment relationship. And so those outputs that were published during an excluded contract may become eligible if the author has been continuously employed by that institution and all other eligible employment relationship criteria have been met. But further details of that can be found in the policy online. And I just want to very quickly reflect on the guidance as it relates to staff made redundant as well. As with REF 2021, HEIs are required within their code of practice to set out their approaches to submitting eligible outputs by staff who have subsequently been made redundant, be that through voluntary redundancy or voluntary severance, or indeed compulsory redundancy. Additionally, for REF 2029, a pre-publication substantive link, i.e. the substantive link to an output published after the end of the eligible employment relationship, cannot be utilised in situations where the author has been subject to compulsory redundancy by that HEI. I would note just now, following a question we've had online, that this only applies to redundancy at that submitting HEI. So if the author had an eligible employment relationship, produced an eligible output at HEI A, and then left and went to HEI B, and was subsequently made redundant at HEI B, that would have no impact on the eligibility of the output to HEI A, just because that has already been asked through the inbox. Over to you, Jonathan, to talk about representative submissions.
Thank you. Okay, so this policy area is new to REF 2029. It was outlined in the initial decisions as the direction of travel. And I've spent a bit of time now talking through the detail and the expectations, but I think it's important to say that the policy has been developed in the context of a decoupled framework and the shift of focus onto institutional assessment. So the expectation is that submissions include the highest quality research across all the disciplines in which an HEI is active. And submissions should be representative of the research undertaken by the submitting unit during the REF period. And it should reflect the range of research activity in a UOA. And this is intended to mitigate concerns that full decoupling could lead to the underrepresentation of research areas and research groups. We've defined a submitting unit in the CKU guidance as the collection of subject structures, research groups, research activity in an HEI submitting to a UOA. And we recognise that that's going to look vastly different across the sector, different institutions. It will look different at different parts of the same institution. And there's a degree of flexibility there for institutions to, I suppose, create a submission that is coherent with the reality within the institutional context. The representativeness of submissions will be directly assessed, so that's and that will be done through the CKU element of the disciplinary level statements. And the important issues of research diversity, demographics, and career stages will be assessed as part of the wider disciplinary level evidence statements, but aren't required in this particular area. And I think this change has been put in place in the context of the wider framework and the evolution of PCE assessment and the development of that, and that being an important place where those kind of foundational elements of research excellence are assessed and on which research outputs are built. Yes, I think we recognise, we've had a few questions that people saying there's a tension between submitting the highest quality research and creating a submission that's representative of the range of research undertaken by the submitting unit. And I think that's fair, and I guess that's the balance that's required in this exercise. So we do acknowledge that that is a decision and a balance that institutions will have to take around this. And next slide, please. So again, still focusing on that representativeness and the representation of research activity. We've outlined in the guidance that representativeness will be assessed as part of the CKU element of the disciplinary level statements, and we set out the criteria against which it will be assessed, so that submitted outputs are reflective of the research strategies and structures of the submitting unit over the REF period, including contributions to large-scale research programs, networks, and national or global initiatives. And that submitting units reflect the diversity of subject areas that are pursued within the UOA, and that submitted unit outputs reflect the diversity of research practices and outputs produced within the disciplinary area, including the extent to which different and diverse types of outputs are included in the submission. And I think it's important that this part of the guidance links to the code of practice. There's a requirement in there for institutions to set out how they're going to do this in a meaningful, transparent and robust way that is open for their institution and for that will be published. And please watch the Code of Practice update town hall video for more information about that. Next slide, please. Me again. So Yes, so there's a requirement for that for a significant research contribution. So this is really a carryover from the last exercise, essentially. And in cases of multi-author outputs, and in some disciplinary areas, this will be more relevant than others, it may be necessary to demonstrate that a significant research contribution was made by an author with an eligible employment relationship to the HEI. And it's anticipated that the approach to demonstrating significant research contribution will broadly align with the approach used in the last exercise. And again, we've kindly asked the panels to think about where this is relevant in the different disciplinary areas and to think about what this needs to look like as part of the criteria and working methods. Next slide, please. And over to you.
Thanks. So this slide's talking about the assigning outputs to UOAs. So HEIs will have the flexibility to assign outputs to the most appropriate UOA based on the UOA descriptors and the output subject matter and the overall research strategy of the institution. And the UOA descriptors will be refined by the panels during the criteria stage and published after that. Importantly, as mentioned before, there's no requirement for the output to be associated with the same UOA as the author's contract. So in cases where a substantive link is underpinned by a volume contributing contract, there's no expectation that they will be assigned to this or associated with the same UOA. The output itself can only be included once within a single UOA submission by a single HEI, and would note that the kind of exception that multiple weighting is still available and is not impacted by this. It may be returned by more than one HEI if both can demonstrate a substantive link, and we anticipate that that will be more common than previously. So an output may also be included in the submission to multiple UOAs at the same institution, as long as it meaningfully aligns with the UOA descriptors. And so the output will be assessed separately for each UOA. It may score differently in each case, but as long as it aligns with the UOA descriptors, which we anticipate will be broad and well defined, the output can be submitted to more than one. So, which brings me quite nicely onto interdisciplinary research. So REF 2029 encourages the submission of inter and transdisciplinary outputs. Following feedback from REF 2021, though, no interdisciplinary research flag will be used because it wasn't considered to be an effective tool for supporting interdisciplinary research and feedback from REF 2021. Instead, as I've just mentioned, outputs can be submitted to multiple UOAs within the same institution where they align with those UOA descriptors, and panels will be producing those final UOA descriptors, and the intention is they will be sufficiently broad to support inter and transdisciplinary research in this way. Should be noted that submission of an output to more than 2 UOAs will increase the likelihood of audit, but that is not intended to dissuade the submission of interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research to all the UOAs that it is aligned to. We're also aware that cross-referral is a very valuable tool, and it will remain a feature of REF 2029, just to reassure anybody who is concerned about that. Reserve list. So as with the previous exercises, HEIs will have the opportunity to submit reserve outputs on a one-to-one basis. So for every reserve output, it will be associated with a specific output within the submission. And there are 2 sets of outputs that may have associated reserve items in the reserve pool. So the first set that might have an associated reserve output are those with the potential to have a delayed publication date. So in cases where an output is due to be published before the 31st of December 2028, but actually unfortunately isn't published before that date, the reserve output will be brought in, and it will only be assessed at that point where the intended output has not been published within the REF 2029 submission window. And so the second scenario where an output might be included on the reserve list is in relation to multiple weighting of outputs. So where HEIs are requesting multiple weighting, either double or higher, reserve outputs can also be submitted to provide reassurance in a circumstance where that multiple weighting request is declined. So in a situation where that request for multiple weighting is declined, reserve output or outputs will then be assessed. So where multiple reserve outputs are required, so in cases where triple or quadruple weighting has been requested, reserve items need to be submitted in priority order and will be addressed in that order or assessed in that order if the multiple weighting is declined. So in both cases, whether it be in relation to outputs with delayed publication or multiple weightings, if no reserve output or outputs are submitted and the original output is either not published in time or is not given multiple weighting, then the missing outputs within that submission will be given an unclassified score, which is why we're offering the reserve pool as a mitigation of that risk. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Is it worth saying that the panels will be developing the sort of finalised policy and positions around multiple weighted outputs to give the kind of clarity around what that looks like in their forthcoming work. In terms of confidential outputs, again, I think this is a carryover from the last exercise primarily. So confidential reports, including any item produced in the publication period with a company or government body or other research sponsor but hasn't been published because of its commercial or other sensitivity. They can only be submitted where the HEI has prior permission from the sponsoring organisation. They'll be shared only with the REF team and those involved in the assessment process and will be destroyed as soon as no longer required. They will not be listed as part of published submissions. And back to you.
Brilliant. So this is the unit reduction request process, so a new process for REF 2029. So as I mentioned earlier, previously there were individual circumstances and that culminated then in unit reduction requests as an additional step. For this REF, there will be the opportunity for HEIs to request a unit reduction in exceptional circumstances where it's not been possible for the required number of outputs to be submitted. So requests have to meet the criteria as listed in the policy, but to summarise very quickly, these are need to be exceptional circumstances that were unforeseen and outside of the institution's control. So sort of disaster scenarios where maybe a lab is lost or similar, and that was really beyond the kind of couldn't be anticipated. Additionally, it needs to have a significant impact on the UOA's ability to research productively, and it must be evidence-based. So it needs to be supported by clear, compelling evidence, data, details of exceptional circumstances, explanation of the impact, etc. And institutions wishing to submit a unit reduction request must do it in writing to the REF team, and similarly will be informed of the decisions and the outcomes in writing. And additional information on this process will be included in the special requests element of the guidance to be published later in this process. And that's then on to audit. So REF 2029 will audit robustly and full audit guidance is currently in development. So the policy and guidance that's been published online includes some indications of the sort of areas the audit may focus on for information. So things like the verification of output selection, including verifying substantive link, whether the date of publication is within the REF period, etc. And secondly, verification of output assignment to a UOA, so whether an output genuinely aligns with UOA descriptors. And we've had a couple of queries already around the distinction in the guidance between unclassified and ineligible scores, which is mentioned at the end of the audit guidance. And just to clarify quickly, in case anybody's got that question at the top of their list, so an unclassified score and an ineligible score are both 0. But an unclassified 0 is awarded in cases where an output is omitted, so i.e. where the number of outputs determined by the volume measure haven't been submitted and no reserve output or outputs have been provided. Whereas an ineligible score is received in a case where an output doesn't meet the definition of research and therefore was not eligible for inclusion in the exercise overall. So just to clear that up, because I know that question has already come up at least once. And that is the end of the summary.
Yeah, super. Well, just to say thank you, and there's a lovely QR code there, which will set up ref updates straight to your inbox. Please have a look at our Get Involved pages on our website to look at any opportunities to do that. And as ever, you can email us at info@ref.ac.uk if you've got any thoughts about how we can improve our guidance or any queries. I think we're up to like 12,000 queries we've managed so far in the ref team, so we are is a proactively managed resource for you. Yes, so I think that's it. And just to say, yeah, thanks for all your questions. We'll get to them now. They genuinely do help us think about where more clarity is needed on different parts of the guidance. So please do fire your questions in, and we'll do what we can with them, and we'll take away the ones that we can't answer straightforwardly now. So
thanks. Yeah, so we've been taking questions in, and we'll get through as many as possible. As Jonathan says, I'm really sorry we won't get to all of them, but we will answer them in time. So our first question is, does the requirement to use HESA IDs as evidence of a substantive link to the institution inadvertently recouple the outputs to individual staff members? And also, is it expected that the attributed HESA ID will be included in the published submissions in 2029?
That's a good question. I guess we don't view the requirement to use HESA IDs as evidence of as sort of inadvertently recoupling. I think we think of decoupling as the separation of the volume contributing contracts and the removal of a submission of a limited list of people away from the output submission to be what we're looking at with decoupling. I guess what we're also trying to do is to focus more on institutional assessment and assessment of disciplinary areas, and as we feel that's the natural kind of role of the ref, and as it's linked to QR and institutional funding, that the assessment should also operate at that kind of level. So that's more the way we're thinking about it, rather than a sort of. I think when we did the policy development, we thought through the different options on this, and we thought actually people are hugely important, and actually the only way that you can really link an output to an institution is through the eligible employment relationship and how to demonstrate that substantive link. So yeah, I think that hopefully there's some of the foregrounding in the published policy provides a bit of that context, and there's some other resources on the ref website which speak to the kind of thinking behind that, if that's helpful. Rebecca, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
I think it's just a tiny thing, just to flag that the HESA ID is very valuable for evidencing that substantive link for verification and audit. So it's also intended to be a reasonable, proportionate level of burden to provide that information. So that's the only thing I would add to what you just said.
Fabulous, thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is, how does the new guidance encourage a wider, more diverse range of outputs to be submitted?
So I guess one thing to flag there is the update to Annex K that is due later on in the year, just to fully sort of outline all the different output types and make sure that all of those different types of research activity and outputs are being thought about and considered as part of the CKU process, and acknowledge that hasn't been published yet. But beyond that, it's all about sort of getting out of the way, I think, of and preventing the perception of risk of submitting the different types of outputs. Is there anything you would add on that?
Yeah, I mean, just to say that we appointed a research diversity advisory panel to this exercise with that explicit kind of function of thinking about how we make sure that the diversity of research is acknowledged and it's foregrounded as a priority, and it's important for the sector. It's one of the vital parts of the sector, I think, and that we, in broadening the sort of the different roles with whom there may be an eligible employment relationship. So thinking about technicians and software professionals and all sorts, the wide diversity of people in the sector. Actually, we're going to really encourage the diversity of outputs in that as well. So yeah, I'd agree with you, Rebecca. But it's very much baked into the way that we're approaching this exercise. It's really been highlighted as an important priority for us. I think it's an important strategic priority in the sector generally.
Thank you. So next one, if an early career researcher has several publications already in the current REF cycle but has never had an eligible contract, how do they make themselves appealing to a potential employer if they have nothing to offer an institution for their REF submission?
Thank you. I mean, it's a good question. I think what we tried to do with the decoupling is when in the evaluation and kind of the expert advice that we took in developing this exercise, it came out that actually REF can have it can really boost careers, but it also can be severely impact careers in a negative way if outputs aren't submitted to the exercise. I guess we wanted to kind of one of the aims of the kind of decoupling was to try and remove that negative impact. And what I would say is that everyone will start from the same point, I guess, that previous REF outputs will not be eligible for submission if they're for a new employer for anyone. So in many ways, we see it as actually leveling out that playing field where there was where that kind of dynamic did exist previously. So I guess that's the intention around that. I don't know if you've anything to add, Rebecca.
Yeah, just reflect that actually having an output that is submissible to the REF should and presumably is in the majority of cases only one of many factors that are being considered by institutions when they are making hiring decisions. And there's a huge value in having a track record of publication, having particular expertise and knowledge and skills, be it in knowledge exchange, teaching, research expertise as well, and the fit within an institution. So there's a lot of different things that institutions presumably are using when they make their hiring decisions. And as Jonathan says, the REF is removing that or leveling that relationship in terms of the outputs that are submissible to the REF by pursuing substantive link policy.
Yeah, and I think just bouncing off that a little bit, the people's CVs aren't remain the same regardless of the REF, and I think that's kind of one of the aims, and with having a decoupled framework, that the publications and the work and the experiences that have been gained have still been gained regardless of the REF, but it kind of aims to remove that as one of the secondary kind of impacts of the exercise, if that makes sense. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you. So the next question is, how will cross-referral work, given we can return an output to a different UOA from their volume UOA? Do you envisage cross-referral only being used when an HEI doesn't submit to the relevant UOA?
That's a really good question. Sorry, Jonathan, I've just jumped in. But I think that is one scenario where cross-referral will certainly be useful in such scenarios where, as you described there, that the HEI is not submitting to that UOA. It also may be relevant in cases where the output is transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary and has multiple relevant or fits in multiple relevant UOA descriptors, but also has other important influences that may also be usefully dealt with through cross-referral during the assessment process. So it's designed, it's intended to allow for flexibility, and there are all kinds of different scenarios where an HEI might find that flexibility useful. That the example that you give is one, certainly. Is there anything else you would add on that one, Jonathan?
Just that the panels are going to be producing their guidance on how they will their working methods, and cross-referral will be part of that development. So there'll be more information on that.
Lovely, thank you. So you've clarified that if something is published on day one of an eligible contract, then it is eligible for submission. But we've had a question as well, if you can submit an output published on one day after starting an eligible contract, how can that HEI be said to have enabled the research?
Yeah, I think that is a good question, and something that we considered as part of the policy development, and we had the conversation about that in some of our policy development kind of groups, and overall, I think the kind of consensus was that the balance of burden and impact meant that would be a very difficult thing for institutions to deliver, and overall the impact wasn't likely to be too high for the other elements of that kind of policy decision. So I think do recognise the question and absolutely, but I think it was one of those decisions that we took on balance, where there wasn't exactly perfect answer, and that was the conclusion that we came to. Anything you'd add, Rebecca, to that?
No, I think it's that proportionate burden question that was being grappled with there. So yeah, it's a really good question.
Thank you. So the next one is, what is the distinction between research activity and scholarship? And should HEIs define research activity themselves?
So there's quite a detailed definition of research within the policy, and I won't bore you by going through it all now. It is unchanged from the previous ref. So that gives you a very, very broad kind of discussion of the different types of sort of research activity that lead to outputs that can be submitted. So I would suggest reflecting on that in the first instance, to distinguish between research activity and scholarship.
And the second part was about should HEIs define research activity themselves, I think. And I guess this connects to the second clause of the sort of substantive link element. I think we're probably heading towards providing more kind of detail around that. It is intended to be a broad, flexible definition. It's about it. We think research activity can mean a number of things, but I suppose it's to try and ensure that there is some expectation or connection to research activity within the role of people whose outputs are being submitted. So I think there's more to follow on that, but the intention is flexibility to try and encompass the wide range of roles that enable and contribute to research. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Rebecca.
No, that's quite comprehensive.
Thank you. What will define being in the public domain? E.g., does this mean publication, performance, or exhibition rather than an output being made available on an institutional repository?
Yes. So is it my turn to go? I think it is. Yeah. So we've received a few queries about this, and it feels like that this is something we might need to develop an FAQ on. I think that we need to think about it across disciplines and think about diversity of research as well. So I think we'll put our minds to this and do a bit more developing work to try and provide some clarity in the FAQs is our intention. I don't think we've got any further than that on this query, have we, Rebecca?
No, I don't think so.
Sorry, that's a bit of a more to come answer.
Thank you. Sorry, bear with me, trying to keep up with the number of questions. So the next one is, will there be any verification of the volume measure for each UOA in advance of the final submission?
Verification of volume measure, this is audit question, or is this, assuming that this is an audit question, because I guess I could interpret it in multiple ways. We haven't published the audit guidance yet, and so I wouldn't like to preempt that. So I would say we will have the audit guidance in the future, and that will lay out the approach in full. Is there anything we can say at this point on that? I don't
think so, really. I think we've thought a little bit about, obviously we're relying on HESA data and actually kind of, what are HESA's verification processes and, to what extent are relying on those, and to what extent does audit come in, to what extent can we use our systems to do some sort of verification. So we're still balancing it up, and I guess there's a few factors to kind of consider around that. So yeah, nothing much we can say at this point, I would say.
Thank you. So the next question is, will HESA IDs be used to analyse EDI characteristics of the output pool?
It's a good question, and something that we've has come in, I think, through our queries. I think we're probably one that we're going to have to take to FAQs. I guess there are a few things to balance out around that, as in if we're looking at institutional assessment, then what does that mean? I suppose if people aren't being submitted, outputs, many have multiple authors, and I guess the choices that institutions make about how they demonstrate a substantive link will vary. So I guess there's some questions for us to think about in terms of how meaningful would it be, and but I think the conversations are still forming a little bit around that. So we'll again, I think that's one to the FAQs, I'm sorry to say.
Thank you. So a bit of a longer one. So can you go into a bit more detail on the planned exception to the rule that eligible employment relationships that occur after an output is first made public available cannot constitute a substantive link? It sounds like there's an intention to allow the submission of long form or long process outputs where employment relationship occurs after output first made publicly available. Can you describe what scenario might bring that about?
Yeah, I can pick this one up if that is helpful. So yes, that's exactly the interpretation. We've had a lot of feedback from the sector in various different formats around that deals with that concern, particularly around long form and long process outputs, where and actually as well feedback from our advisory panels where it may be appropriate to look at that rule around not submitting material where it's published before the substantive link relationship is developed. So we are looking at whether it is and how this would look in practice, and this is something that the panels are looking into: what a long form output, what a long process output would be defined as, that would then be eligible for submission even if it was published before someone was employed at an institution. So that, without preempting the work that panels are going to do, bearing in mind that they will be doing that later in the year, this might be around a monograph that has been many years in production. It might be a different form of long process output. which has been produced before someone joins an institution, and it's looking at whether and how that might be submissible after someone had joined an institution. Jonathan, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of links to that notion of a decoupled framework and a focus on institutional and disciplinary assessment and ensuring that that the ref assesses outputs that are enabled and supported by an institution. And I guess, you know, if it's if an output is published before someone joins a new institution, then the new institution has not supported that output. And I guess there was some concerns about the potential impact on research diversity in certain disciplines or institutions where long form or long process outputs don't fit neatly into the ref cycle, and actually in certain areas they will, you know, exceed a ref cycle to the from the research being conducted to the publication of outputs, the production of outputs. So there was the worry that the ref might sort of disincentivize different research types and create a undesirable kind of set of incentives in the sector where we're actively trying to support research diversity. So yes, I guess that was the kind of underpinning rationale, and reflects the kind of conversations we've had and trying to make sure that the ref is applicable across the whole wide range of diverse research in the sector.
Thank you. I've got a question on retired or emeritus staff. How will their outputs be treated? Though many are on 0.1 or similarly small contracts wouldn't be considered eligible in the guidance.
We are aware that there is some ambiguity within the policy on emeritus professors, and we will. This is an area. It's one of the non-answers. Sorry, where we will be taking it away to reflect on adding some clarity, removing that ambiguity going forward. So yeah, sorry, non-answer slightly there.
Thank you. And there's a question about the significant contribution to output. So if you have one co-author on the output from the focal HEI out of 2, is that significant? What about 1 of 3 or of 6? Where is the line drawn? And will it be the same across all UOAs?
Yeah, I mean, so I think this is going to vary massively across disciplines, where you have like hyper authorship in, you know, some disciplinary areas where there's hundreds of authors named on a paper, and therefore that, you know, that question will be will look different to other areas where perhaps sole authorship is more common. So we know that there are disciplinary differences, and we anticipate that it won't be the same line across UOAs. We'd say that there only needs to be one substantive link with an author who has made a significant research contribution in order for an output to be submitted. But in some disciplines, we think there's probably going to be a need to define what a significant research contribution looks like, so that there is a sort of a significant contribution to the research conducted or by the author or delivered by the author. So it is one substantive link is needed, but there will be disciplinary differences that will be developed by panels. I think that's all we can say about that. Is that right, Rebecca? Is there anything to add?
No, I think that's pretty comprehensive.
Thank you. A question on when we'll be publishing the guidance on disciplinary level statements for CKU.
So this is is dependent on the ending and the conclusion of the PCE pilot, and the work that will then go on with panels to do with the disciplinary level statements. So it will be after the panels have met, after the pilot is over, and that guidance has been developed. So later in the process, but I think reasonably so before March, April time next year.
Yeah, it aligns with the published schedule. When we say, I think we say that the complete guidance will be out. There'll be a consultation period planned as well, and we're anticipating that we'll have everything will be out at that point, and that's the point for the discipline level statement guidance.
I think we're out of time now, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Sylvie. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks everyone for attending. Thank you for all your questions. They're hugely valuable. As ever, we enter into a process now of understanding where more clarity is needed, engaging with the sector. So we really value your time and your thoughts. And yeah, just to say, yeah, thank you, and take care, and cheerio.